Hi guys, Georgette here. Welcome back to my channel, G.A. Rodgers, and thank you so much for joining me. So today I'm coming in with a sew along, and it is for this vintage cover-up pattern, Simplicity 9209. I made this little yellow dress right here. Now this pattern came together really quickly, so this might be a very short video. But if you are interested in seeing the instructions and how to sew this pattern, stay tuned.
This is the Everybody Cover Up in 2 lengths. Pullover, very loose fitting garment with side seam pockets, has short raglan sleeves, elasticized neckline, and self belt. Long cover up with side slits is ankle length. Short cover up is above knee length. The fabric suggestions are cotton and cotton blends, gauze, batiks, broadcloth, muslin, laundered cottons, lightweight terry, not suitable for obvious diagonals, extra fabric needed to match plaids, stripes, or one-way design fabrics. For pile, shaded or one-way design fabrics use with nap yardages / layouts. The notions you'll need are thread and one package of 1/4 inch elastic. Now I cut a size small, which is a size 10-12. The bust would be 32.5 to 34 inches, waist 25 to 26.5 inches, the hip 34.5 to 36 inches. Now for my size small and 45-inch fabric, the pattern suggests 3 1/8 yards of fabric. If you have 60-inch wide fabric, the pattern suggests 2 3/4 yards of fabric.
Okay, now let's take a look at the pattern instructions. Here we have our line drawings, and I will be making the shorter version today. Here is the belt, which I will not be making this belt simply because I think that this dress is going to be a little bit short and it doesn't need any more cinching up. Here's the back. As you can see, the back looks very similar to that front. Let's open it up. All right, now let's take a look at some of the pertinent information. The seam allowance is going to be 5/8 of an inch unless otherwise stated. I've already finished all of my before cutting instructions, so I've pre-shrunk my fabric, and I do plan on cutting this double thickness with right sides of my fabric folded together. And after I cut it, I will make sure that I transfer all of my markings. So let's see which pieces I'm going to need. All right, it looks like I'm going to need pieces A through F. However, piece D is the pattern piece for your elastic, not for your fabric. Now let's see what these pattern pieces are. Both the short and the long version take the exact same pattern pieces. A is your front, B is your back, C is your sleeve, D is your elastic guide, E is your pocket, and yes, this dress does come with pockets, and F is your tie belt, which again, I will not be making in this sew along. All right, let's take a look at these sewing information, see if there's any more pertinent information that we might need before sewing up our garment. Here we go. It says to sew garment following sewing directions. Fine. Pin or machine based seams matching notches. Here we go. Stitch 5/8 of an inch seam allowance unless otherwise stated. Where indicated, stitch in the direction of arrows. All right, now we have press seams open unless otherwise indicated. Clipping when necessary. That's up here. Clipping when necessary so that your seams will lie flat. All right, some of the techniques we may cover in this sew along will be ease stitching or gathering, edge finishing, applying interfacing, understitching, and stay stitching, which for stay stitching, they want us to stitch 1/2 inch from the cut edge in direction of the arrows. Alrighty, let's take a look at these instructions, shall we? Okay, step number 1 is going to be stitch or serge the center front seam. Now in my dress, I canceled out my center front seam because my fabric was actually wide enough for me to cut the center front on the fold instead of having a seam run straight up and down it. So I'm going to skip that part. Let's go to step number 2. Step number 2 would be to serge or stitch the center back seam. Now I do have a seam in my center back dress because I didn't realize that my fabric was wide enough to accommodate the pattern piece until after I already cut it. So I do have this center back seam that needs stitching, and I'm going to go to the machine and do that now. I've stitched my center back seams together and I've serged the edges just to have a nice pretty finish. And now I'm going to move on to the next step. Step number 3 would be stitching sleeves to front and back. So it says, with right sides together, stitch sleeves to armhole edges of front and back. To reinforce the seam, stitch again over the first stitching, then clip your curves and press your seams open. So let me head to the machine and get that done. All right, guys, let's talk about this sleeve hem. Here is my sleeve, and it is not yet attached to my dress. I wanted to press up the hem allowance before attaching it to the dress. And as you can see, I've serged the raw edges of this fabric because it does fray just a little bit. So I wanted to make sure that it's nice and neat and kept tidy while I am stitching down the hem. Okay, so the hem allowance for this sleeve is 5/8 of an inch. And I've already gone ahead and pressed up my 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now the pattern wants us to turn this into a narrow hem. However, if you wanted to skip that part, you could just go ahead and stitch down your seam allowance as is and just have, I don't know, a 1/2 inch seam allowance instead of a narrow hem. But we're going to follow the instructions. So now that I have pressed up my 5/8 of an inch, it has created a lovely crease line, which I'm going to use as my guideline. So I'm going to take my raw edges, or my overlocked edges, and match that to my crease line, just like that. Okay, and then I'm going to press it down. For the sake of time, I'm just going to finger press, right? And now after that's been pressed, I'm going to take the whole thing and fold it up again, just folding it right along my original crease line, my original 5/8 of an inch seam allowance crease line. All right, that is the technique that I'm using for making this narrow hem. I folded it up once, then I'm matching my raw edges to that crease line, and then fold it up again and top stitching it down. I will also be repeating the same method on the skirt hem when it comes time to hem that. All right, the sleeves have been attached, and I did forget to clip the seams, so that's just gonna have to be okay. But I did stitch them on and finished the edges with the serger. Next step would be the neckline casing and the elastic. So we're gonna press under 3/4 of an inch on the upper edge to inside, forming the casing. We're going to press under another 1/4 of an inch on the raw edge, stitch close to inner edge of casing, leaving an elastic, leaving an opening to insert elastic. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. Now, this particular pattern calls for a 1/4 of an inch elastic to hold up this entire beautiful blousey dress. They only ask for a 1/4 of an inch elastic. So I'm going to bump mine up to a wider elastic. At this point, I have gone ahead and cut my front. Let me show you. Here's what I did. I added an extra 3/8 of an inch to the necklines. So I just came up, when I was cutting out my fabric, I just came up an extra 3/8 here and cut 3/8 of an inch more along this edge and then connected the line back down to the armhole. And I did that both for the front piece, the back piece, as well as this sleeve piece. This is the line that I extended 3/8 of an inch up, cut it across, and then connected it back down to the armhole because I knew I was going to want a thicker elastic, and I had to do it across the sleeve as well because this sleeve is part of the neckline. So again, I extended it 3/8 of an inch up in the front, along the sleeves, and in the back. All right, let's get back to these instructions. And the next step is to cut a piece of elastic, the length of the elastic guide. Insert the elastic through the casing, stitch the ends of the elastic together securely, and after that we're going to move on to stitching the opening close and distributing the fullness evenly. Remove your basting. I didn't see where they said to baste anything on this neckline, but I'm assuming that they mean you basted your opening closed when you did your initial forming of the casing. That's what I'm guessing, but no big deal. We're gonna move on. And here's a tip at the bottom. To secure your elastic so it won't twist in wearing, stitch through all thickness of casing in the groove of each seam. And for this, they're just saying stitch your elastic down so that it doesn't twist and turn while you wear it. Okay, so because I'm putting in a wider elastic than the 1/4 of an inch, I'm gonna have to make the casing for my elastic wider as well. So instead of following the directions and folding everything down 3/4 of an inch, I'm actually folding it down 1 inch. And then I'm gonna go back in and take the raw edge and fold that down the 1/4 of an inch. So after all of that folding has been done, I should be left with a casing that measures about 3/4 of an inch wide. And then I'm gonna go ahead and insert my 3/8 of an inch elastic into the casing. Okay, let me get to the ironing board and start folding all this down. Alrighty, my casing has been made. I've stitched down about 3/4 of an inch. And I've left myself a little opening right here so that I can feed my elastic through this hole. Let's see. I'm going to feed my elastic straight through there. All right, so let me get my elastic. Here's my elastic guide for the size small. It just looks a little bit tiny to my eye. So what I'm going to do is, instead of cutting my elastic, I'm actually just going to pin it. So I'm going to measure, oops. Yeah, so I'm going to take my elastic and, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my elastic, put it on top of my guideline, and then pin it. See. There we go. All right, so now that I have it pinned in place, what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed this elastic through the casing, and I'll just stop where the pin mark is, and then I'm going to try on the dress just to make sure that this is the right length and it fits me okay. Alright guys, so during the process of me trying this on to make sure that it fit, my elastic folded in half inside of the casing. So now I'm having to go back through and kind of straighten it out and pin it down. Yeah, I really wasn't thinking that it was gonna fold in half just from trying it on, but it did. So now I'm gonna go through and try to straighten it out as best as I can, and then I'll top stitch it down. But definitely this was my mistake. So let me get that done and then we'll get back to the sew along. All right, I've gone back and straightened out the elastic. It actually turned out just to be easier for me to pull out the elastic and re-thread it through. So now I'm going to very gently and delicately take this to my machine and stitch the elastic closed and then stitch through this casing to ensure that I don't have any more twisting issues. All right, I'm going to show you what that looks like when I'm done. Alrighty, so I have my elastic enclosed into the casing, and I went back and I looked at the instructions, and it says to stitch through all thicknesses of the casing in the groove of each seam. So I'm assuming that in the groove of each seam means in the sleeve seam, like if you were to stitch in the ditch. Let's see if you can see that. There you go. And so that's what I did. So that's what I did on all of the sleeve seams, plus the center back seam, and I even did a stitch right down that center front. Hopefully that helps to keep it from twisting up on me. We'll just have to wait and see. And you know, worst case scenario, if I have to take out the elastic and replace it, no big deal. Okay, so let's move on to the next step. The next step would be pockets and underarm seams. We've got a note here that says apply pockets to front and back as follows. Okay. So for this pocket, it says with right sides together, stitch pocket to garment, matching large dots, and having raw edges even. Stitch in 3/8 seam. So applying this pocket to my dress, I'm going to use a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Then it says to press your seam toward the pocket, pressing the pocket out. All right, let's go ahead and get that done. Now that my pockets have been attached to my dress, I am going to go back to the machine and go ahead and understitch my seam allowance to the pocket bag itself. Now the pattern instructions did not say to do this, but I just feel more comfortable with it being stitched down because I know that it's going to help it stay inside of the dress and not peek out like how it's doing now. See how it's peeking out right now? That understitching is really going to help it to stay inside, nice and flat, and you'll have a nice clean finish. So I'm going to take this to the machine now and understitch all of my pocket bags. All right, so next up I have pin front to back at underarm seams, matching large dots. Then for the short dress, which is the one we're making, in one continuous stitching, stitch underarm seam and pocket squaring stitch at large dots. So we're going to do this entire underarm seam all the way down the side seam around the pocket and back down the entire side seam. Just to note, if I were making the long dress, I would stop my stitching right at the large dot where the side seam slit would start. But I'm making the short one, so we're going to skip that altogether. Next up, it says for both dresses to go ahead and clip the back seam allowance at ends of pocket as shown. Press your seam open above the clip's pressure pocket towards the front of your dress. So I don't know if you can see this. Let's try to get in there a little more. But this is the side seam, this right here. You can see it was clipped right here. And then they pressed the side seam open. There's your seam allowance for the pocket. Again, they clipped it right here. And they pressed the rest of their side seam open. And that is exactly what I'm going to do now. All right, my side seams are done and I've completed the pocket. I've also clipped into the seam allowance as per the instructions. Now, you're supposed to clip into the seam allowance so that everything lays nice and flatly, but I'm always a little bit scared that it's going to fray and end up making a hole right where my stitch lines are. So I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of hem tape just around these edges just to prevent it from fraying. That's my own little concern. I don't even know if it's going to fray because it is cut on the bias, so it shouldn't. But just to make myself feel a little bit better, I will be putting some hem tape along these edges. Okay, step number 6 is the sleeve hems. We're going to press under the hem allowance, which is 5/8 of an inch per the pattern. And then to form the narrow hem, we're going to tuck under the raw edge to meet crease, press, stitch hem in place. Number 7 is we are going to do the hem for the short dress. So we're going to mark our length, press up the hem along marking, mark depth hem, and trim evenly. To form narrow hem, tuck under raw edge to meet crease, press, stitch hem in place. And the final set of instructions are for the belt, the tie belt, which I'm not doing, but just in case you are curious, this is how they are indicating that you should construct this belt. So the first step is to stitch your notched ends of the belt in at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then they want you to fold the belt in half lengthwise with right sides together, stitch in another 3/8 of an inch seam, leaving an opening to turn the belt right side out. Then you're going to trim your seams and corners. Then you're just going to flip that belt right side out, press it, slip stitch your opening closed. And that's it. So pretty much you sew the center seam here first, then you fold it in half, stitch again along this outside edge, leaving an opening, of course, to flip it right side out. You flip it right side out, you top stitch your opening closed, and you are done. And here it is, all finished. As you can see, I've got the elasticized neckline, and I love this because you can wear it just as is. You can pull it down to one shoulder, or you can pull it down to both shoulders and just have a different look. I also love that you can stretch out these gathers, so I can make the front completely flat and just have the gathers on the sides. I like that too. As you can see, it is quite short, which I thought it might be. But that's fine because this is a beach cover-up. So I'm gonna be wearing it on the beach or around the pool. So it's okay that it's gonna be this short. I absolutely love that it has pockets, and these pockets are deep. I mean, real deep. So I can put my phone and keys in here and not worry about them falling out. They do become a little bit difficult to find because this is such a voluminous dress, but you know, they're there and I appreciate them being there. You can see how wide everything is. I mean, the sleeves are wide, the dress is quite wide. It's very much like a muumuu is the only thing I can think to refer it to, but it's got a lot of volume in this dress. And I don't have that center front seam. I do have the center back seam, which, you know, again, thankfully I have that seam going back there. And let's see, I think that's about it that I have to share about this dress. Yeah, and you know, that's all right. So now let's get into a little more details about the dress. Let's start with the fabric. I used this cotton fabric from Hobby Lobby. It is 100% cotton and it's 44 inches wide. Now I did a hot water wash on this and it didn't shrink widthwise at all. I'm not sure if it shrank lengthwise. I do know that it remained 44 inches wide. I don't know if it shrank lengthwise because I'm just not measuring 3 yards. However, the pattern called for 3 1/4 yards, and like I said, I only had 3 yards, and I ended up making this work. Now, granted, I did not cut a belt out of this fabric, but that's because I knew that the dress was going to be very short, so I didn't feel like I needed to cut a belt anyway. And I ended up having about 1/8 of a yard left after having cut out the pattern. Now I did cut out a size smaller than the smallest size on the pattern. The pattern starts at a size medium. I sized down one and cut out a small, and the pattern runs from medium to double XL. It's got a total of 6 pieces, but one of those pieces is the elastic guide. So I counted as a total of 5, including the belt. What else? Let's see. I actually canceled my center front seam because the width of my fabric was wide enough to accommodate the pattern piece. I didn't realize this until after I already cut the back pieces, which ended up being a happy accident because I needed that center back seam to be able to tell the front from the back. And I also made the elastic casing a little bit wider so that I could use a 1/2 inch elastic instead of a 1/4 inch. I just felt like that 1/4 inch was going to be way too wimpy to hold up this dress, which you can see it's very voluminous. It's got a lot of fabric, so I wanted something a little bit more substantial than that 1/4 inch elastic. Now, this fabric might have been a little bit too heavy for this dress. It is, I mean, it's a lightweight cotton, and it kind of reminds me of like a linen look type of fabric, but it might just have been a little bit too stiff for this particular pattern. I think next time when I try it, I might try something a little bit more drapey, like a gauze maybe, just to see how that's going to work with this particular style. But even though this is a little bit more stiff than I maybe would have liked it, I still love this dress. I think it's going to be awesome as a beach cover up, especially because you can kind of just roll it up and throw it in your beach bag. You know, it is going to be a little bit wrinkled, but because of all of this fullness, it might not be that bad. I love this dress. I think it's fun, and I think I might make another one. I think I might try the longer version next time, especially because, you know, we're doing a lot more lounging at home these days, so this might be something that I put into my lineup for just kind of laying around the house, not doing anything. Alright guys, thank you for joining me today. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you would like to see more sew-alongs and pattern hauls and fabric hauls and just general information from my channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And I will see you all next time. Bye!